one thing, 3I Atlas, as it's called, is interstellar, meaning it's from outside Earth's solar system.
What if the first signal we hear from deep space does not come from a star or a distant world, but from something moving straight through our own solar system? That fear became real when observatories across Earth picked up a faint pulse coming from 3I Atlas. It lasted only seconds, but it carried a pattern no one could explain. Astronomers froze as the readings repeated again and again. The message was clear. Something out there had spoken first, and it was not an accident. The signal that should not exist. When the first report reached the radio observatories, most researchers believed it was a simple malfunction caused by background noise. Nothing in space should have produced a clean pulse from the direction of 3I Atlas, yet the readings were too sharp to ignore. As more stations compared their data, the uncertainty turned into concern. A single object drifting between the planets had generated a signal powerful enough to reach Earth, and the timing lined up with the exact moment 3I Atlas crossed a high-energy region near the Sun. The alert spread quickly through the scientific community, and for the first time since this interstellar visitor was discovered, experts admitted that something about its behavior no longer matched the natural pattern of a comet. The pulse repeated with the same spacing, the same strength, and the same direction, leaving no room for coincidence. Every new analysis revealed more structure inside the signal, as though the source had locked itself into a steady rhythm aimed outward. The fact that this happened while 3I Atlas continued to brighten and shed material in a strange pattern only deepened the mystery. The object had already shown strange motion, unusual chemistry, and a coma that behaved unlike anything normally seen. The arrival of a radio pulse was the last thing astronomers expected, yet it matched every warning previously raised by those who believed this object could hold more than frozen dust. The discovery forced researchers to work through the night, searching for natural explanation that could remove the weight of what the data showed. Still, nothing fit. With every hour that passed, the signal seemed less like an accident and more like an intentional release from a body that was entering the inner system at impossible speed. A pattern hidden in the noise. As the signal continued to repeat, radio telescopes across 3 continents began tracking 3I Atlas with new urgency. The first question every team asked was whether the pulse could be caused by natural outgassing or jets bursting from the surface. Comets often release bursts of energy that mimic short radio spikes, but none of those events ever formed a steady pattern. Every model built to explain the behavior of 3I Atlas collapsed under the weight of its own numbers. The timing was too stable, the shape too clean, and the consistency too perfect. What made this even more unsettling was that the pulse continued even when the object rotated, as if the source did not depend on sunlight or its position relative to Earth. Instead, it held the same strength from the same region within its coma, acting as though it maintained a fixed orientation in space. That forced astronomers to consider whether a solid structure hidden inside the haze could be behind the emission. The idea sounded excessive, yet the signal matched no known process from dust, ice, or gas. At the same time, optical teams monitoring the object noticed a strange shift in its brightness. The glow around 3I Atlas began to tighten into a narrow band stretching behind it, almost like a thin tail, formed by something more organized than a random spray of particles. The change matched the moment when the radio pulse became strongest. Researchers found themselves facing 2 connected events: a drifting interstellar body showing a narrowing light signature and a repeating signal that refused to fade. The deeper they investigated, the more the data pushed them into unfamiliar territory. Whatever was happening around 3I Atlas, it was unfolding in a way no comet or natural body had ever displayed as it moved closer toward Earth's side of the system. The frequency shift no one expected. While radio observatories struggled to decode the repeating pulse, space-based telescopes focused on the shape of 3I Atlas itself. The closer the object drifted toward the inner system, the more unusual its light curve became. Ordinary comets flicker as they rotate because their surfaces are rough and uneven, but 3I Atlas displayed a smooth rise and fall, repeating every cycle as if the nucleus beneath the coma were polished or symmetrical. This steady pattern matched the rhythm of the radio signal, creating a disturbing link between the two. It suggested that whatever pulsed from within the object was tied directly to its rotation, almost like a beacon fixed to a stable surface. The idea was unsettling for scientists who had spent their careers studying natural space bodies, yet the measurements offered no alternative. Spectral data added another layer of confusion. Instead of the usual mixture of water vapor, carbon monoxide, and dust that erupts from normal comets, 3I Atlas carried high levels of rare compounds that should not survive long journeys through the galaxy. These materials normally break down under radiation, but inside this object, they appeared preserved, protected in ways that defied expectations. The pulses emitted from the comet shifted slightly when these materials became more active, suggesting a direct relationship between its chemistry and the radio burst. Such coordination should not exist. Nothing in natural sublimation could sync itself with a timed radio emission. Ground teams began running simulations, trying to reproduce any natural chain of events that could create such harmony between rotation, rare material release, and a clean, repeating pulse. Every attempt failed. As the data continued to align in near-perfect patterns, astronomers realized that 3I Atlas was no longer behaving like an object simply drifting through the system. It was acting like something aware of its environment, adjusting itself as it approached Earth's region of space. The pulse that matched its rotation. As 3I Atlas continued its journey inward, astronomers began comparing current readings with early detection logs from the moment it crossed the outer boundary of the solar system. What stood out immediately was how drastically the object's behavior had shifted. In the early months, its coma had been faint and unstructured, barely visible against the darkness. But as it neared the sun, its energy output grew far beyond expectations, increasing at a rate faster than models could justify. This wasn't a simple thermal reaction. Something inside the object was responding to the environment with precision rather than randomness. The timing of its brightening aligned almost perfectly with the first appearance of the repeating radio signal, making it seem as though one event triggered the other. Researchers noted that the pulse was strongest when the 3I Atlas crossed regions dense with solar particles. Instead of being disrupted by the interference, the signal sharpened. Natural emissions usually scatter under such conditions, but this one behaved like it were using the charged environment to strengthen itself. The pulse cut through the noise like a deliberate broadcast. Every time it passed through a turbulent zone, the emission refined rather than diffused. This alone pushed astronomers away from familiar explanations and toward the possibility that the source behind the signal had a form of stability that no icy body should possess. Meanwhile, deep space monitoring systems recorded changes in the tail of 3I Atlas that looked almost organized. Jets usually burst at random angles, but here they narrowed into a single direction aligned with the object's travel path. The tighter this alignment became, the clearer the radio pulse grew. These two events moved together so precisely that teams wondered if the object was adjusting its shape or emission path on purpose. Whether instinctive or engineered, the coordination was too exact to ignore as the object drew closer to Earth's orbit when multiple telescopes heard it at once. The closer 3I Atlas moved toward the inner system, the more startling its behavior became. Astronomers monitoring its motion noticed a subtle but undeniable change in its trajectory. It was not enough to classify it as a major deviation, but it was precise enough to raise an alarm. Small, non-gravitational shifts are common in comets due to jets firing unevenly, yet the change in 3I Atlas followed a clear, mathematical curve rather than a chaotic scatter. Every adjustment matched the timing of the radio pulse, as though the object altered its path in sync with each emission. Multiple teams independently confirmed the correlation. The more the signal strengthened, the more the trajectory tightened, creating a narrow corridor pointing directly toward the region of space Earth would occupy in a few months. The coincidence was too exact to dismiss. At the same time, observatories studying the light reflected from the coma saw an unusual hardening pattern. Instead of thinning as material burned off, the outer glow condensed into a more compact shell. This tightening contradicted the expected behavior of an object shedding mass. In normal circumstances, the coma expands with heat. Here, it pulled inward, as though guided by an internal system holding everything in place. The strange contraction lined up perfectly with the moment the radio pulse reached its peak. The more the coma compressed, the sharper the signal became. Researchers realized they were dealing with an object acting in ways no drifting interstellar visitor ever had. The synchronized trajectory changes, the compressed coma, and the steady radio rhythm suggested coordination well beyond any natural process. Scientists were forced to consider that the pulse was not just a byproduct, but a function guiding the body's actions. As 3I Atlas moved deeper into the system, the idea took hold that the object was not only sending a signal, but responding to conditions around it, the strange geometry inside the signal. As the world focused on the growing radio signal from 3I Atlas, a separate layer of discovery emerged from observatories studying its thermal output. Infrared scans revealed a temperature pattern that defied everything known about frozen bodies drifting through space. Instead of heating evenly under sunlight, the object displayed concentrated hotspots that pulsed in perfect rhythm with the radio emission. These zones brightened and dimmed like a heartbeat, each surge matching the exact moment the signal reached its peak strength. Natural heating could not create pulses. This clean dust, ice, and rock do not time their temperatures to repeating radio cycle. The pattern suggested a controlled release of energy, something keeping certain regions at stable level, while others rose sharply. This level of regulation had never been seen in interstellar visitors, not even in the rare objects previously studied. What made this more alarming was that the hotspots moved across the surface as 3I Atlas rotated, staying aligned with the same internal region. They did not drift randomly or scatter from sunlight. Instead, they held to a fixed geometry that seemed tied to the source of the radio pulse. Scientists realized they were observing heat that behaved like a system rather than a reaction. Every pulse left a thermal footprint, spreading briefly into the coma before cooling into silence. Then, exactly on schedule, the next surge followed. The synchronized rise in heat, the structured release, and the rhythmic radio burst pointed toward one conclusion that researchers had resisted for weeks. Something inside the 3I Atlas was producing energy in a regulated way. Whether natural or artificial, it acted with purpose rather than chance. As these findings circulated, astronomers confronted a possibility they had avoided. The object was not just emitting a signal, it was powering it, and with each pulse growing stronger, 3I Atlas seemed to be preparing for something as it continued moving toward Earth's side of the solar system, a signal older than our solar system. As astronomers continued tracking 3I Atlas, another startling clue emerged from magnetometer readings collected by multiple stations. The region through which the object traveled displayed a disruption in the local magnetic field, one that rose and fell in perfect alignment with the radio signal's rhythm. Natural comets rarely affect magnetic fields in any measurable way. Their gas and dust do not generate enough force to disturb the heliospheric environment on a repeating schedule. Yet 3I Atlas behaved as though it carried an internal source strong enough to bend nearby magnetic lines with every pulse. The distortions were subtle but consistent, forming a pattern identical to the signal itself. This match left scientists with a challenge they could not escape. If the magnetic shifts and the radio emission were linked, then 3I Atlas was releasing energy across multiple levels simultaneously. Closer examination revealed something even more unexpected. Each magnetic fluctuation moved outward in expanding rings, almost like ripples spreading from a stone dropped into water. These waves traveled farther than expected for a body of its size, suggesting the presence of highly charged particles being pushed outward in sync with the radio burst. The effect was too structured to be random. It followed a predictable expansion pattern that repeated every time the signal returned. This observation pointed toward a mechanism operating inside the object rather than a natural outburst from its surface. Meanwhile, the coma surrounding 3I Atlas reacted to these magnetic changes in visual waves. The dust patterns shifted along the direction of each wave, revealing brief streaks inside the halo that formed and vanished with every pulse. These streaks were aligned so neatly that it looked as though the entire coma was responding to an instruction rather than behaving freely. As the object approached the region of space nearer Earth, the pulses grew stronger, the waves widened, and the streaks brightened. All signs pointed toward a coordinated process hidden inside the visitor, moving deeper into the system. The moment NASA went silent. As the radio signal, magnetic ripples, and thermal pulses aligned with perfect precision, astronomers turned their attention to the coma itself, hoping its structure would reveal what drove the strange behavior of 3I Atlas. The coma looked ordinary from a distance, but high-resolution processing exposed a hidden pattern. Instead of a loose, chaotic cloud, the dust and gas formed thin layers arranged like faint shells, radiating from the nucleus. Each shell matched the timing of the radio burst. Every time the signal pulsed, a new layer expanded outward, forming a subtle ripple locked to the same repeating cycle. This discovery shattered the last assumptions scholars held about natural comet activity. Even more puzzling was how consistently the layers maintained their spacing. Dust normally spreads unevenly because tiny differences in heat, rotation, and gas pressure scatter the particles, but here, the coma shaped itself with a smoothness that suggested a guiding influence. The uniformity hinted at some internal regulation affecting how material escaped the nucleus. Each layer carried traces of rare compound, matching the chemistry shifts recorded earlier. These compounds brightened slightly each time the radio signal peaked, reinforcing the growing suspicion that the object's behavior was tied to the pulse itself. At the same time, observatories studying sunlight reflected from the coma detected a shift in polarization. Light reflected off the dust revealed patterns too organized for natural scattering. Instead of random alignment, the particles oriented themselves along a consistent path, responding to each wave of magnetic change triggered by the pulse. This alignment allowed researchers to map the pulse's direction inside the coma, showing it emanated from one specific region rather than from the entire object. All evidence pointed in one direction. The coma was not reacting to random heat or pressure. It was answering the signal, and as 3I Atlas drifted toward Earth's region of space, those responses grew sharper, stronger, and harder to explain away. The pattern no one could explain. As astronomers dug deeper into the strange new radio signal from 3I Atlas, the ninth revelation became the most unsettling discovery yet. Every observatory that analyzed the data found the same repeating structure hidden inside the transmission, a rhythm that matched the interstellar object's rotation with unnerving precision. This was not something drifting or fading at random. It pulsed in perfect cycle, rising and falling at the exact moment. 3I Atlas turned the same face towards space. It was as if the object was broadcasting a timed pattern, a kind of cosmic heartbeat that lined up flawlessly with its spin. This is where the shock set in. Natural sources rarely produce such consistency. Dust jets flicker, plasma waves scatter, thermal emissions waver, but this signal never slipped once. It stayed locked to the object's 20-hour rotation, like a metronome carved into space itself. Scientists looked for every natural explanation. They studied gas vents. They checked for reflective ice patches. They even modeled how sunlight might bounce off hidden surfaces. Nothing matched the timing. Nothing could explain how the transmission stayed so sharp and so steady as the object moved through space. The final surge, that changed everything. The 10th and most dramatic moment arrived when 3I Atlas released a sudden surge in its radio signal, a spike so intense that multiple deep space receivers detected it at the exact same time. This burst wasn't random. It wasn't noise. It carried the same repeating structure as before, but now amplified and stretched across a wider range of frequencies, almost as if the object had increased its output on purpose. What stunned astronomers most was that the surge happened precisely when 3I Atlas crossed a key point in its path, a location where Earth and several major radio observatories were in direct alignment. To those watching the data stream live, the timing felt impossible to ignore. For months, the signal had remained steady, quiet, subtle. Now it roared. The surge lasted only minutes, but during that window, the transmission displayed multiple layers of repeating patterns stacked on top of each other. These layers formed geometric ratios found in natural growth spiral and star-forming regions. Nothing about them behaved like known cometary emissions. Instead, the burst looked like an information packet, a snapshot of something far more complex than simple electromagnetic noise. Thanks for watching another episode. While you are still here, make sure to click the video on your screen for more quality content.